Assalamu alaikum. A very good morning, esteemed professors, guests, and friends of the Al-Furqan Foundation. It gives me a great honor and pleasure to welcome you to this symposium under the title The Translation Movement Between East and West, organized by the Al-Furqan Islamic Heritage Foundation within its symposia series. Thank you for being with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, from the earliest periods of recorded history until today, translation has played a crucial role in disseminating the scientific knowledge. The translation movement has been one of the most important and powerful tools in the exchange of knowledge and in the development of science. During the medieval period, as a result of the famous Greco-Arabic translation movement, Arabic emerged as a lingua franca of scientific exchange. For most of the medieval and early modern periods, Latin was the lingua franca of scientific exchange. Then we started to see the reverse translation movement from different European languages to Arabic, Persian, and Ottoman, etc. In order to shed light on this important aspect of the scientific exchange and cultural fusion between East and West, and taking into consideration that during this year we are celebrating the 35th anniversary of the Al-Furqan Islamic Heritage Foundation, established in 1988, and here we are 2023, an occasion that we are highlighting with particular projects, events and publications. And in order to highlight another important aspect, on this auspicious occasion, i.e. the 35th anniversary of Al-Furqan, with a significant event such as today, and important topic which relates to our late chairman very much, His Excellency Sheikh Ahmed Zaki Yamani, may he rest in peace, and his idea about bridging cultures, especially East and West. One of the aims that Al-Furqan represents, and one of the reasons why Al-Furqan was initially established, and established specifically here in London, i.e. to serve as a bridge between East and West. Based on all these, hence we are organizing this one-day symposium which aims to shed light on the first translation movement, i.e. from Greek and other to Arabic language, the second translation movement from Arabic mainly to Latin and probably other like Hebrew and other languages, and the third translation movement from Latin to Arabic, Persian, Ottoman, etc. I have to admit that we were aiming to bring more speakers to tackle this. Already the program is quite heavy for today, but we were aiming to bring more speakers to tackle these important topics, as we were intending to focus more on the third translation movement. A lot of work has been done on the first and the second. We deem that the third translation movement hasn't been given the attention that it needs. However, as soon as we started the preparations for this event, we realized that the experts in this field are very few. Also, a number of scholars and researchers whom we invited had to send their apologies due to their circumstances, personal circumstances. Therefore, hence we ended up with a limited number of professors who are honoring us today with their presence, and a few of them who couldn't join us today in person, but they will join us later through Zoom. Hopefully we won't have technical problems. All of whom will enlighten us with their knowledge and presentations on the aforementioned topics. I would like to use this opportunity to thank all the professors for their participation and contribution at today's event. Also, many thanks to the professors who will be chairing the sessions today. And last but not least, I thank you all, our esteemed guests, for being with us today. Wishing you a fruitful day. Now, I would like to invite our chairman, Mr. Sheikh Ahmed Zaki Yamani, to welcome you and say a few words. Thank you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you, Sally. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed scholars, distinguished guests, and friends of the Foundation, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I welcome you to today's historic symposium. And as I do so, I find myself with a heart filled with gratitude and a mind steeped in reflection. As Sally has mentioned, this year we are celebrating the 35th anniversary of the Al-Furqan Islamic Heritage Foundation, a testament to unwavering dedication and really collective efforts. Our passion and hard work through the years has established the foundation as a beacon of knowledge, not just in preserving heritage, but also shedding light on new avenues that promote harmony and elevate our collective human heritage. Our gratitude will always extend infinitely towards our visionary founder, my father, His Excellency Sheikh Ahmed Zaki Yamani, rahmatullahi alayh. His dream was boundless. He envisaged this foundation as a bridge, encouraging dialogue and synergy amongst people. From the first day, he held the conviction that the true value of the work we do is not merely in the physical preservation of manuscripts, buildings, or artifacts, but rather in the interactions our work inspires, the collaboration it fosters, and the future they shape. And this is why he always instilled in us all the belief that transmitting knowledge transcends mere linguistics. It is a sacred act of weaving connections, fostering understanding, and cultivating empathy. He recognized the translation movements of ages past as rhythmic echoes of history, harmonizing diverse cultures, emotions, and ideas. And this is why every Al-Furqan initiative in the past 35 years bore testimony to his conviction. Knowledge binds humanity, and it is our mission to fortify this connection. Today's symposium is a vibrant echo of my father's lifelong dedication to the pursuit of wisdom across all divides. And as we honor the vision of our founder, we also turn our gaze and recognize the torchbearers who have kept the flame of knowledge alight throughout the ages. Ladies and gentlemen, we convene today to acknowledge a defining intellectual bond that has shaped our modern history. And as we do so, we also celebrate the silent architects of this legacy, the translators, the copyists, and the scribes. You might not have heard of them, but they are scattered across history, spanning diverse languages, ideologies, and geographies. From the scholarly sanctuaries of Baghdad to Qurtuba's luminous gatherings, from the Byzantium fabled corridors to the bustling epicenters of Cairo, Toledo, Damascus, and Istanbul. These heroes of history have interlaced civilizations, weaving a tapestry of shared wisdom. Their enduring efforts have saved and bridged the philosophies of Plato, Al-Farabi, and Copernicus, the medical insights of Galen, Ibn Sina, and Galileo, and the mathematical genius of Euclid, Al-Khwarizmi, and Newton. Their legacy reshaped societies, democratized knowledge, and laid cornerstones for intercultural dialogues. Our symposium's theme, the translation movement between the East and the West, is not just a glance back through history. It stands as an affirmation of these corridors of understanding. For over 1,000 years, these translators have whispered stories and shared wisdom between the East and West acting as envoys or ambassadors, epitomizing the eternal symphony of knowledge exchange. And these eras we speak of were not just about knowledge migration. They signified Renaissance moments where translators, copyists, and scribes were the alchemists of cultural confluence, safeguarding our human progress and ensuring that the knowledge of ages past wasn't lost, but rather built upon. Without their enduring effort, we might have found ourselves perpetually rediscovering knowledge rather than standing on the shoulders of giants. Now, these messages we will speak of, and the messages that will emanate from today's gatherings, are both impactful and essential. Because in today's digital age, we are misguided and influenced by the intricacies of artificial intelligence. And as of yet, it is neither artificial nor intelligent. And we are stained by humanitarian tragedies that unfortunately continue to haunt us and divide us. With every innocent life taken, a piece of our shared humanity fades away. Therefore, it becomes even more crucial to remind ourselves and to honor in one voice every monumental legacy that has united humanity and shaped our interconnected world. Now, before I end, and as we venture deep into our symposium, allow me to pause and extend a heartfelt thank you to everyone who has contributed to turning this vision into a reality. I start with our esteemed speakers from all over the world. We highly appreciate your presence here with us. Today, you are not just sharing information, but rather decades of passion, commitment, and dedication. Thank you very much. And to our relentless staff, Sally and the rest of the team behind the scenes, making sure every detail is finely tuned as usual. Thank you. And to our cherished attendees here with us today, your presence is a testament to the shared commitment and passion for the translation legacy and the knowledge transfer that binds us all. Again, I look forward to a fruitful day full of engagement and hopefully uncovering new ideas and thoughts. And in the spirit of our founder's vision, may we continue bridging divides and enlightening generations. Thank you very much. And I would like to invite Professor Salim Al-Hassani to chair our first session and invite the rest of the guests. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We've got a very busy day today, but after what Sharaf had presented, it's very difficult to find the right words, actually. It was a fascinating piece of not only literature, but of really a very exciting statement about the foundation. And when I looked at him and then I turned myself to that picture, now I know that Sheikh Ahmed Zaki Yamani still lives with us, actually, almost physically, incarnated in his son. MashaAllah. Right, we have a busy day. I have two speakers in my session, and they were, I think, announced as first Charles Burnett and Peter Pormann, but now we have reversed. We have now reversed it. Peter is going to be the first speaker. I have pleasure. These two great scholars are also great friends of mine, and no great difference. But I think it's to do with the process of disseminating the information today. There is some dynamics about the flow of information, and the topic that Charles Burnett was going to be speaking about is more related to session 2 than session 1. And session 1 was supposed to be presented by someone else. I think that he is now, he's going to be online in due course. And the trouble is because of the timing with the United States, they're asleep now. Okay. Well, I have great pleasure to introduce Peter, if he would be good enough to come. Professor Peter Pormann is a long-standing colleague with me, but he's please have a seat. Thank you. He's professor of classics and Greco-Arabic studies at the University of Manchester. But before I start talking about him and Charles, there is a joke about Khoja Mullah Nasruddin once was put in my place, and he didn't want to talk much. So he said, "Look, guys, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't, those who know Peter, tell those who don't, and let's get on with it." In the Quran, there is a very famous verse, which is about, "O people, we've created you from male and female, and made you into peoples and tribes, so that." The translators that I have looked at, they always say so that you may know each other. But actually the word in Arabic is ta'arafu, not ta'arifu, ta'arafu, which tends to have some other connotations. In my view, the word means so that you may appreciate each other. So that you appreciate each other. And the way you appreciate each other is when you know the good things about the person, not the bad things about the person. So I'm here, I'm supposed to praise and mention all the good things about the speakers. I'm not going to do that because it's a very long list in here. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a scholar here who is really prolific in his work of translations, and also fundamental pieces of research and work, and particularly in the history of medicine. I had personal encounters and work with Peter in the generation of a very famous book called 1001 Cures, and really it was a great pleasure working with him. So without taking a long time, I'd like to ask Peter to start his lecture. You have 29 minutes, right?
Starting now.
Right, thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I want to thank Sali and the foundation for inviting me to take part in this fascinating day of talking about translations. So without further ado, I want to talk to you about this first translation movement, from Greek into Arabic. And I want to talk a little bit about how we can know the mechanics of who these translators, these unknown translators were, and how they worked. So how can we know who translated works from Greek into Arabic? We have different accounts. We have what I would like to call external accounts of people like Ibn Anadim, who writes his Kitab al-Fihrist, and other people, later on Ibn Abi Usaybiya, others in the biobibliographical tradition, who basically talk about the translation movement and who translated what. We also, very luckily, have an account by Hunayn ibn Ishaq, one of the most important translators when it comes to medicine, about the works of Galen that he translated and others that were left untranslated. So this is kind of an internal account. But we also have the evidence that comes from the translations itself, and basically the manuscripts that might attribute a certain name to a translator, or basically the translation itself that have a certain style and might allow us to say these translations are similar, these are different. Now, if we look at the scholarship of the translation movement and how it was studied, we will see that there is a tendency of ever greater uncertainty. So when Guterres and Dimitri Guterres, who will speak later to us, and Professor Andrews, when they started their Greek-Arabic lexicon in the late 80s, they said the reason for not assigning names of translators to Greek-Arabic translation is that the issue of the identity of the translators has not been addressed in all its complexity, and ramification in scholarly literature, the problem of Syriac intermediaries has not been subject to serious analysis. The ascriptions in the bibliographical manuscript sources have been all too frequently accepted uncritically. The questions of the transmission of the individual translations and of the consequent difficulty of identifying the extant translations with those mentioned in the sources are far from having been resolved, and the subject of the effort which subsequent revisions and contaminations from commentaries had on the nature of the original translations has not even been broached. So this was some 35 years ago, and we are still basically in this realm. Just another voice of caution is that of Richard Walzer, who basically looked at Bergstresser and his attempts to talk about the school of Hunayn ibn Ishaq, and he distinguishes between translations by Hunayn and his nephew Hubaysh and his son Ishaq. And he says basically Bergstresser, who tried to do this, to attribute translations to individual translators, well, what he attempted, when he attempted this, his efforts were based on too narrow a foundation, so that basically nothing certain could be achieved. So this is another voice of caution by Richard Walzer. So we basically have largely negative results. The biobibliographical sources are unreliable. The accounts of the translators are problematic, and I'll come back to this in a moment. And the manuscript evidence is also unreliable. So very often, any translation of a medical text would always be attributed to Hunayn ibn Ishaq, you know, whether it's Hunayn or not. And so basically all these indications are problematic. Likewise, the linguistic evidence is problematic. And importantly, the question of Syriac intermediaries has not been addressed. So you will know probably that most translations of Arabic, philosophical, medical, and scientific text went via a Syriac intermediary. But these Syriac intermediaries are largely lost to us, and they have hardly ever been studied, especially in relationship with how did the Syriac intermediary influence the Arabic translation. So all these things are basically our known unknowns. So what has been done? What have scholars tried to do to date? So we have two major endeavors to study the Greco-Arabic translation movement. The first is the Greek-Arabic lexicon by Gutas and Andres, from the preface of which I've already quoted. And then there's Ullmanns Wörterbuch der griechisch-arabischen Übersetzung des 9. Jahrhunderts, his dictionary of Greek-Arabic translations of the 9th century, about which I will talk a bit more. Now then, there have also been individual efforts to study translations, and I mean, I just mentioned two. I, for instance, tried in my doctoral thesis in 2004 to look at a medic called Paul of Aegina, who lived in the 7th century AD, wrote an encyclopedia in Greek, and that was translated into Arabic, and there's also some Syriac that survives in fragments. And I have concluded tentatively that this is probably the translation of Hunayn ibn Ishaq, only to find myself being criticized by Samuel Barry, my former PhD student, who says it's not Hunayn. So I'm not going to go into whether or not this is true or not, and I am to a certain extent persuaded by my student who rectifies my own ideas. But just to show you basically that this is happening. Another example is the Nicomachean Ethics, which was studied in detail by my esteemed teacher Manfred Ullmann, and he basically comes to the conclusion that there are two different translators for the first and second part. Again, I will skip the details to you, but individuals have tried to identify individual translations and attribute them to individual translators. So I said I would come back to the Greek-Arabic lexicon of the translation of the 9th century by my esteemed teacher Manfred Ullmann. So what he's done is he produced the first volume in 2002 in which he focused on Galen's On Simple Drugs, Book 6. And why that is, I will explain a little later. And then he produced supplements, so 2 volumes in 2006 and 7, which basically deal with other texts, such as On the Affected Parts, which he thinks was translated by Hunayn, although Garofalo, a famous Greek-Arabic scholar, thought it was Hubaish. Now, within these arguments about authorship, the glosses that we find, Qala Hunayn, so Hunayn said, so the explanations about how Hunayn interpreted certain things have been analyzed, and there are basically different ideas of whether they are interpolated, so were they put in later, or are they part of the translation. There are arguments around that. So this is just one, I mean, On the Affected Parts is just one of the texts where you basically, where things, I mean, the manuscripts say Hubaish, the manuscripts say Hunayn, the biobibliographical tradition says Hubaish, linguistic analysis by Ullmann says Hunayn, where you have these problems. Now, there are other new avenues in the study of Greek-Arabic translations that have recently been developed in the, let's say, last 10 years. And one of these initiatives is Alpheus. So you see here Galen's On the Anatomical Procedures, like an excerpt from the Arabic translation, first edited by Max Simon in the early 20th century, a German scholar, and Ivan Garofalo edited the books that are extant in Greek later on. So that basically what this new tool enables us to do is access the translations in digital format, and it makes these available in forms of digital corpora, and that is something that becomes more and more important as we go into the future and try to use the tools of modern corpus linguistics in order to analyze these texts. So Alpheus makes many translations and many original Greek texts available to us, as you can see here, a digital corpus of Greek-Arabic studies with many texts. I mean, I won't dwell on this too much. Now, what about Syriac? Scholars have long known that there are Syriac translations of Greek texts and that these Syriac translations played a crucial role. And there are some scholars who have done work on this and have tried to analyze these Syriac translations. I'm just giving you like a few highlights. Merckx, a German scholar in the late 19th century, for instance, looked at Galen's On Simple Drugs. Margulius, the first Laurean professor of Arabic, no, he's not the first, that's Pocock, a Laurean professor of Arabic at Oxford in the late 19th and early 20th century, basically produced texts that have to do with the translation of Aristotle's Poetics. And there's a bit of Syriac evidence, for instance, by the Cream of Wisdom, like a 13th century text. I mean, so there are extracts that exist in Syriac that he also collected, and he tried to make certain, predictions, or tried to analyze to a certain extent how the Syriac played a role in this. There have also been other texts that were edited that are basically Syriac translations of Greek texts, in particular the aphorisms by Pormann, who edited a Paris manuscript. This is Parisinus Arabus 6734. Basically, it's a bilingual manuscript that contains a number of texts, but one of which is the translation of the aphorisms in into Arabic and into Syriac, and there has been significant scholarship on other texts as well. So, for instance, on the categories like Aristotelian text from the so-called organon, so these fundamental texts. And again, I've tried to do some analysis by hand of how the Syriac played a role for Paul of Aegina, but all in all, there's not all that much scholarship on the role of Syriac in particular in this transmission. There's some, but relatively little. So now I want to talk about the phases of translation that we find in the area of medicine in particular. So Ullmann argued, I mean, he started arguing this in the 1970s, but he basically produced this argument in 2002 in his lexicon, that there was an earlier phase of translation in the second half of the 8th century AD, which is characterized by paraphrastic translations, a lot of transliteration, and he associates this with a translator called Al-Bitriq, about whom we know very little, who is basically the father of Ibn al-Bitriq, who's a famous translator of philosophical texts in the Kindi circle. And again, that's something I'm not going to explore here today. And then there's a second, kind of a second phase of translation in the 9th century, in the mid-9th century, around Hunayn and his workshops, so Hubaish, Ishaq, and so on and so forth, and others who work with him. So an earlier translation and a later translation. The later translation is characterized by greater sophistication. So for instance, parataxis is used in the earlier translation, so coordination, whereas there's hypotaxis, or a subordination with the sentences within sentences within sentences that we find in this later translation workshop, so to speak. So basically, they've moved forward. The translations are very different. Now, in Syriac, we find something slightly similar, because we know that there's a bunch of, or like a number of texts by Galen were translated by Sergius of Reshaina, a monk basically who lived in Alexandria most of his life, and who translated not just philosophical texts but also medical texts, and we have some of these. So that's like a kind of a first era of translation in the 6th century, exemplified by him, and then the Syriac translation that were done in Hunayn's workshop, because you probably will know this, but Hunayn did not only translate from Greek into Arabic, but also from Greek into Syriac, or had other people translate from Greek into Syriac, and then might have done the Syriac to Arabic translations himself. So, so there are, in theory, many Syriac translations from the second era as well. Now, what you really want to do now is to, in order to study the mechanics of how Syriac played a role in this transmission, you really want to study texts where you have the early Syriac translation and the later Syriac translation, the early Arabic translation and the later Arabic translation. And there are very, very few examples of this where the texts are extant in the area of medicine. And the two most famous examples are the aphorisms and Galen's On Simple Drugs, Book 6. Now I will briefly talk about the aphorisms and then focus a bit more on Galen's On Simple Drugs, Book 6. Now for the aphorisms, we have an earlier translation, and in the form preserved in the lemmas of a commentary attributed to Palladius, which is privately owned, and which Biesterfeld first drew our attention to in the 70s. So we have lemmas, so like basically the quotations from this earlier translation. And this earlier translation also survives in a historical work of the 9th century where it's also quoted. So we have both quotations and lemmas and can reconstruct this earlier Arabic translation. And the later Arabic translation survives in many manuscripts of the aphorisms, both the aphorisms themselves and commentaries on the aphorisms, and I won't go into details here. So that's for the Arabic. For the Syriac, we have this manuscript which Pormann edited, again Paris, Paris, Bibliothèque Nationale de France, Fonds Arabe, 6734. And we also have quotations in the so-called Syriac Epidemics, a text discovered by Gregory Kessel, and which within this commentary on the epidemics, another text by Hippocrates, basically the aphorisms are quoted. And this, according to Kessel, is the translation by Sergius, and it's an older translation. So in theory, you can then have the older Syriac, the newer Syriac, the older Arabic, and the newer Arabic translation, and compare this. And I've tried to do this on a very limited scale in an article in 2016. And there's been a lot of scholarship recently about who produced the Pormann manuscript translation of the Syriac. So Overween argued certain things. So he basically says it can't have been Hunayn, and Mimora and Barry said, well, maybe it is Hunayn, but we're not entirely certain. So there has been a lot of scholarship of this one Syriac translation, but again, little scholarship to try to compare these things on a larger scale. Now, I said I will spend most of my remaining time on Galen's Simple Drugs, book 6, and I want to show you why. So what is Galen's on Simple Drugs? It's basically a text which in the first half gives you the theory of simple drugs, books 1 to 5. And one of the things that is important, and that is an invention by Galen, is coming up with degrees. So he has primary and other qualities, and they can be in the first, second, third, fourth degree. And his theory kind of is expounded in this first half of the book, in books first half of the work in books 1 to 5. The second part contains alphabetical lists of drugs in book 6 to 8, so like plants basically, and then book 9 deals with stones, and book 10 and 11 with other things like animal products and even human products. So especially book 6 to 8 was an alphabetical list and was kind of considered separate for a long time. Now, as I say, there was a first translation by Sergius of Resh Aina, and it's extant in 2 manuscripts, a palimpsest, the Syriac Galen palimpsest, and a very old manuscript in London, possibly from the late 6th or early 7th century, British Library manuscript addendum 14661. And then there's a second translation by Hunayn, and we no longer have that in its entirety. But interestingly, Galen also wrote a work on foodstuffs, so basically what food you should use. And there's a lot of overlap between the content of this book and the texts of On Simple Drugs. So basically, one can draw inferences. I mean, it's likely that Hunayn basically used his Syriac translation when writing the Syriac version of this book, and that's been edited and studied in a project in Paris. And basically, there are a number of places where we can basically compare these quotations from On Foodstuffs with the entries, and I'll show you an example of this in a second. Now, through a curious quirk of fate, there's one manuscript in Istanbul in the Süleymaniye Kütüphanesi Sarai Ahmad III, 2083, which just for book 6 contains an older Arabic version of the translation, so the older Arabic translation of the Greek text, whereas book 7 and 8 and everything that is else that's in there is Hunayn's version. And this was something that Ullmann discovered and which prompted him to produce his 2002 Greek-Arabic lexicon. So for book 6 and book 6 only, basically, we have this old Arabic translation, we have Hunayn's more recent translation in many manuscripts, and we have also, as I said, like the 2 Syriac versions. So this is the manuscript, the British Library manuscript of the Syriac translation, just to give you an idea. So in 2012, I mean it happened earlier than that, but let's say it came out in 2012. In the late 2000s, I tried to do just that, to compare the Syriac version that we find in this manuscript with the 2 Arabic versions. And my conclusions, I mean, I'm not going to go into the details, but my conclusions were that in the Syriac, we see some of this older Syriac translation by Sergius contains some of the same features as the older Arabic version. So coordination rather than subordination, a less sophisticated vocabulary, a lot of transliteration, whereas we have translation later on. But I'm just summarizing this. But this was done on a very small sample, and so it's not full. It did not consider the second Syriac translation, the newer one by Hunayn. Now, in another article that came out roughly at the same time but was written later, colleagues of mine, Siam Baira and others, and I, we tried to find instances where we have the 2 Syriac versions, and for instance, we edited those for an entry on hemp, where you see on top the older translation by Sergius, and on the bottom you see basically the translation into Syriac that is extracted from these quotations from On Foodstuffs by Hunayn, that gives us basically a flavor of Hunayn's translation. And again, we come to the same preliminary results, but obviously these are only preliminary results. Now, in a recent project, my team and I, what we've tried to do is look at the Syriac text of Galen's on simple drugs in greater detail and try to use the corpus tools at our disposal in order to analyze these texts. So we've used a tool called Sketch Engine, which is basically a corpus linguistic tool developed for modern corpus linguists, and we fed the Syriac and the Greek texts of On Simple Drugs into the machine, so to speak, and try to do certain analyses, and I'll show you that in a moment. And we also tried to, so we prepared these electronic files. Let me just show you without further ado how this works. So we would align the Greek text of On Simple Drugs with the Syriac text on simple drugs. And then we have these different corpora. Sometimes it's lemmatized, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it has the diacritic, sometimes it doesn't. And that allows us to do different searches. So this is basically the mask that you see, the user interface for Sketch Engine. Now, that allows us to do all sorts of searches, for instance, for words, phrases, for character sequences, for regular expressions, so with and or things like that, for context. We can use searches in subcorpora. Basically, we used all the tools of modern corpus linguistics that modern corpus linguists are very familiar with in order to study this Greek Syriac translation phenomenon at the start and to do searches. Here you see the mask that allows you to search, and I'll just give you like a little flavor of what kind of searches you can do. So for instance, if you look for the word hamimutha, heat or warmth, you know, the corpus will identify, I mean, don't know, can I, yes, brilliant. So the corpus will give you all the instances of heat here. You don't need to read Syriac, it's just like this word in red here means heat. And then because of the tools of modern corpus linguistics, the machine, through its algorithms, will identify the Greek word that it thinks corresponds to this, and largely it gets it right. So it's thermotes, heat, in different cases. Sometimes it gets it wrong. Here man is just like a particle, or here again it's just a particle, or here ousia just means essence. So it's not 100%. It's, I mean, obviously it's a computer program. The machine analysis of the translation will not be perfect, but it is a fantastic heuristic tool if you just want to know how hamimutha is translated, or what Greek word hamimutha, heat, translate, then you can find thermotes, heat. And there are many other applications that are possible. And again, you know, like, so here you see all these instances of hamimutha and all these instances of heat, basically. There are other possibilities. God, I mean, this is too small. Uvia hamima, so basically a warm swelling. So the expression warm swelling, in Arabic actually like a very interesting translation, waram har, waramun harrun, the same way of translating the Greek phlegmone. Again, you can see that if you look at these two words, you will find that for the most part it translates Greek phlegmone, which means inflammation, basically. And you see this larger here. I mean, maybe I should have done this earlier. So uvina hamima, you know, and then phlegmone. You can see this. So a fantastic tool, and this is just one of the many searches that you can do once you start working with textual corpora. And sorry, it's just too small again for me. Oh, this is just the translation of hamima, warm, thermon, you know, like, and it's just basically more of the same. Now there are other things that we've tried to do. So this was basically a tool which we largely used in order to reconstruct the Syriac text, which is in a palimpsest and often poorly readable. But we also wanted to use this to study Greek Arabic translations, and our idea was to collaborate with Bastian Kind at the University of Louvain-la-Neuve, and they have a project called Gregory, which is basically again a tool for lemmatization of texts. And so if once you've lemmatized the text and basically said, like, okay, this is this case, or this is this word form, and you analyze this, for Greek it's largely electronic, for Arabic and Syriac you have to go there by hand, it will allow you to do other kind of corpus searches. And we are very much at the beginning of this. We've started the work, but we don't have any great results. And I want to conclude by showing you a fantastic project and a fantastic tool that Grigory Kessel, my former colleague Grigory Kessel, has developed at the Viennese Academy, an ERC project called Hunayn.net. And basically what he has done is he has made available electronically and put in parallel the text of Galen's On Simple Drugs, the Syriac translation, the translation by Hunayn ibn Ishaq, and also the 2 Arabic translations. So there's also the older translation by Al-Bitrik. The problem is it doesn't fit on a screen, so I had to, I couldn't show you all 4 together. But basically, through his corpus, you now have aligned the 4 translations for book 6, which will then allow you to use these corpus techniques on a larger scale. So this is our edition basically, and then this is his edition of book 6 in these two versions, and that, my friends, will be the future. So so what do we know about the role of Syriac in the transmission of from Greek into Arabic? I mean, it obviously played a humongous importance. And when it comes to medical texts, we can clearly distinguish these 2 phases of translations, an older and a younger one, late 8th century, mid 9th century, Al-Bitrik, Hunayn, if you want, for Arabic, and Sergius of Reshina and Hunayn in Syriac. And there are certain parallels, but for the most part, the work of really analyzing these translations, analyzing them systematically through the tools of modern corpus linguistics, are just beginning to be realized through the works of many colleagues collaborating across disciplines and institutions. So I'd say, like, we need more lemmatized collections. HunayNet will undoubtedly be an incredibly important part of the story. Now, we also need to expand our sources. I quote here this La Shapira. So it's this is a verse from the Iliad. Uk agathon polykoiranie heis koiranus esto heis basileus. The rule of many is not good. One man should be king, one man should be lord. You know, so this is basically what Odysseus says in the 2nd book of the Iliad to some sort of scoundrel Tiresias, who challenges his authority. And this is the only verse of the Iliad that we have in Syriac. And I give you the Syriac translation there. I'm not going to read it. But so we want other texts, ideally like the Menander sentences, like Greek poetry, other things that should also be studied, and ideally we get to expand our corpora beyond medicine and philosophy, where it's largely stuck at present. But I want to conclude with a thought. Now, what is the result of this translation movement? What does this translation movement do for us? Well, I think it established Arabic as a universal language of science, you see. And I give you like this this quotation here, which makes this, which shows you this. So Arabic was became a language that transcended culture and creed, that transcended religion. And you have here the utterance of a 10th century theologian by the name of, a Jewish theologian by the name of Salman ben Yeroham. And he says, and I'm reading this more or less in standard Arabic, but it's probably like some sort of Middle Arabic. Kullu yawmin kam avonot nartakib wa kam ma'asin tajri lana wa nahnu mukhtalitin bil goyim. So each day, how many sins, avonot, the Hebrew word, do we commit each day, and how many ma'asin, so sins again, but this time in Arabic, are done by us, let's say, whilst we mix with the goyim, so with the non-Jews. Wa muttamathilin bi af'alihim, and we imitate their actions. Wa qasduna nata'allam lughatahum bil nahwi, and our aim is to study their language through grammar. Wa nunfik adarahim, and we spend good money on it. Hatta nata'allamaha, in order to learn that language. وَنَتْرُكْ, and we leave ilm lishon HaKodesh, and we leave the study or the knowledge of the Holy Tongue. Lishon HaKodesh, again, a Hebrew word. وَالْبَحْث an mitzvot Adonai, and the search for God's commandments. So, pardon me? Wasaya? No, mitzvah. Oh, yeah, you're giving me the Arabic word. No, but here he uses the Hebrew term, an mitzvot Adonai. So what I'm saying is there's like a 10th century Jew, somewhere maybe in Palestine, maybe in Iraq. He writes a commentary on the Bible in Arabic, a Karaite Jew, and he uses Arabic. Christians use Arabic, Muslims use Arabic, everybody uses Arabic, and Arabic becomes this universal language. And that is basically the result of that first Greek-Arabic translation movement. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now you can see why would Professor Pormann be awarded the prize for translation, the award of King Abdullah, the Saudi King Abdullah,
But that was
for translation.
That had nothing to do with what I talked about.
I know, but you have a scholar. Thank you very much, Peter. The questions and answers will follow after the next speaker. Now we have with us Professor Charles Burnett, another great scholar. You don't need to sort of have a long list of good things that he has done in his life. I don't want to embarrass him. But just in short, Charles is a professor of Arabic Islamic influences in Europe at the Warburg Institute, University of London, and fellow of the British Academy. Now those two posts are sufficient to identify the quality and the high rank of scholarship that Charles has. And really he has a number of publications and this is now, of course, we're talking about the reverse, the influence. We have so many people are interested in looking at the influence of Arabic and Islamic work into Europe, and there are all sorts of claims. But for people like us scholars, we need to make sure that these claims are definitive and that they are authentic and academically peer-reviewed. And the one to go to, of course, is people like Charles. Now, I had recent great pleasure to work with Charles on something which is, I think, of interest to all of you. 2 weeks ago, there was a book launch that was organized by Charles at the Warburg Institute of the translation of book 4 and 5 of Ibn al-Haytham. I'm sorry, but I think that we have a problem with this phone of mine. I don't think you can hear it. Sorry. Yeah. This book has been, as you know, Ibn al-Haytham has written 5 volumes of Al-Manazir. Seven. And those 7 books have not all been translated directly from Arabic into English. The first three were done by Professor Abdul Hamid Sabra, who have passed away. May God bless his soul. Before he died, he did the translation of book 4 and 5, and it was not properly published. It needed a lot of editing work. So what Charles have done, now why I say this, because for me that was really a fantastic achievement. And what we now have is a proper translation directly from Arabic by Abdul Hamid Sabra of the 5 volumes. The 2 remaining ones are still yet to be translated. The recent work, which has modified and edited the translation, was done by Professor Jan Hockendijk of Holland. Now, without taking too much, I'd like to invite Charles, and he's going to be talking about his main specialty. Sorry, is this? Have we got a problem with the?
I need to change it.
Yeah, it's on the transmission of learning from east to west through the triple agency of Arabic, Hebrew, and Latin. May we welcome Charles to the podium, please. Thank you.
I'm very pleased to be speaking to you all now, and especially following Peter Pormann. And I think you provided everything we need for the first phase of translation from Greek to Syriac to Arabic. And as Salim has just said, my work has been...
This is the next one.
Yes, my work has been very much on the second stage of transmission, from Arabic into Latin, also including some Hebrew, which lasted from the 10th century through to the Renaissance. Now, what I want to do today is just to give a few vignettes, as it were, concerning this translation process. I'm not going to describe the whole history of it. I think maybe other people during the day will be doing that. But what I want to do is to start, as one always should start, with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And I say this because in the translations from Arabic into Latin, the translators had no qualms about translating this as in nomine Domini misericordis et pii, in the name of God, the merciful and pious. We have one God, and this was acknowledged in the process of transmission of works written by Muslims, but also, of course, in Arabic by Christians and Jews. It is acknowledged by the translators, who themselves, of course, could have been Jews as well as Christians, when they translated. So, Bismillah Rahman Rahim, I will start my talk. Now, as I say, I'll just give you a little snippets, or we might say snapshots, of this translation process from Arabic into Latin. The earliest examples we have, in fact, are from Catalonia in the mid to late 10th century, when we have a series of works of practical import, i.e. on making astrolabes, which were in fact transmitted together with the instruments themselves, and on astrology. And we have an example here of one of the earliest translations from Arabic of a work on the astrolabe. And if you can see here, in this early effort, as it were, to translate Arabic, we preserve the Arabic. The Arabic is written in transcription here, and the Latin translation is written underneath. It's clear that the copyists didn't know Arabic, but you can just about recognize al-Aqlim. These are about the climates, the climes, al-Aqlim al-Awal, ardihi, and then we have the Arabic numerals, the alphabetical numerals. You have a ya and you have a waw, and that, of course, corresponds with klime, the first prime, and then you have the latitude for the ardihi, badly spelt in the Latin Arabic there, and it's 16 degrees and so on. I mean, you will be able to recognize quite a few Arabic words in transliteration there. An attempt, as it were, to preserve the original Arabic together with the Latin translation, as if to confirm that the Latin translation is correct. Now, the great period of translation from Arabic into Latin was from the beginning of the 12th century, and is located very much in Spain, and two parts of Spain, both in, first, one might say, in northeast Spain, in the valley of the Ebro, where the kings, the Banu Hud kings, were reigning, and it was a very important Arabic kingdom, what we call a petty kingdom, Taifa kingdom, and especially because the kings, a succession of kings, were very interested in promoting science and in importing the latest science and philosophy from the Middle East, from the Central Arabic countries, and these people were in close contact with Christians who were reconquering the valley of the Ebro, and eventually well, became friends indeed with the last of the Banu Hud, who had themselves been conquered by the invading Almoravids. And if we go to the next slide, we see another vignette, as it were. This is a picture of Latin, Arabic manuscript, herbal. Oops, sorry. I have problems with herbal composed for one of these Banu Hud kings called Al-Musta'in, so it's called the Kitab al-Musta'ini, by a Jew, in fact, called Ibn Baklarish, and he composed this herbal in which he described many different materia medica, things used for medicines, and he wrote it, and it's called a synonyma, in that he gave the many different synonyms for each of the herbs in the various languages in the region of the Ebro here. And we can see one example here. He was obviously, Ibn Baklarish in the early 12th century, was obviously very familiar with the local Latin language as well, and the Romance languages which were spoken in the area. And so you can see here we have the Dam al-Kalbi, the blood of the dog, and you can see here it's described as being hot and moist. And then it's Yoraf bil Latini, it's called in Latin, and here we have a transliteration of the Latin, sanguine de carn, yes, carni. I.e. Dam al-Kalb, and we have this actually transliterated into what we call the Visigothic script, which was in use at the time, sanguinis carnis. Now I just give this example to show, first of all, we have a Jew who wrote it in Arabic, but we have a multilingual society in which Latin was also used and known. And it's in this situation that we have a series of translations made from Arabic into Hebrew and into Latin. We have this great Hebrew scholar Abraham Bachia, who was working with a Latin scholar called Plato of Tivoli in the 1130s and 1140s of the 12th century in Barcelona. But we also have the same manuscript, actually. Another example, this is the last page of this manuscript of Ibn Baklarish Kitab al-Musta'ini, in which you have both, this is the last page, both the Latin a series of phrases and the Arabic equivalent. And this is a kind of, it seems to be a kind of book, what we call a book curse. It prevents people from actually stealing the book or taking over the contents of the book. And you can see that the Latin is probably precedes the Arabic, because we have, for some reason, it's a kind of magical text, the importance of the letter P, P before P, P after P, and of course in Arabic, since there isn't a P, you have a bar as the closest equivalent, and then you have over it P-E, bar I-E, P-E, kabla bear, bar kabla bar. But then if we go to the next, well, this is another example from the same region of the bilingualism, as it were. Here's a treatise, a charter, in which Christians, Latin speakers, are confirming the information in the charter in Latin, but there is an Arabic speaker, what we might call a Mozarab, an Arabic speaker who's left over, who's still here after the reconquest of this region in the late 12th century, and he happens to be called Peter here, Anna Betra. So he's got a Christian name, one might say, but he's signing in Arabic. So this just gives more of an idea of the bilingualism of the area. And I think, yes, it's not quite in the right order, but let's go. a little bit further forward. I'll stick to this because we will come back again to an example of what was happening in this region. But meanwhile, the famous Adelard of Bath, I come from Bath myself, was a pioneer in translating works from Arabic into Latin, apparently in the region of Bath itself, because he'd been travelling. He'd gone to Sicily, he'd gone to the Holy Land, he was in Antioch for a while, he was in Tarsus, and he probably picked up some Arabic manuscripts on this great tour. When he came back, he wrote to his nephew, he wrote a series of natural questions, what he called natural questions, to his nephew, in which he says, you and I made a compact with each other 7 years ago that you would study the education of the French schools in Paris, and I would go in search of Arabica Studia, or Arabum Studia, the studies of the Arabs. And then after 7 years we'd come back and we'd compare what we'd learnt. And of course he's saying that he learnt much more about science and philosophy from the Arabs than his nephew had done in the French schools. And when he came back, he was translating several works of Arabic, astronomy, astrology, magic, and above all Euclid's Elements. And his translation of Euclid's Elements, the Greek geometrical work, which was translated into Arabic, and then it was his translation from Arabic into Latin which became the standard translation of the elements used throughout the Middle Ages. But anyway, this is an example of how important he regarded Arabic to be, because he's translating a work of astronomical tables, which enables you to observe and to predict the courses of the planets for any one day or one time. And in the introduction to this, every word in Arabic is in rubric. So he's saying, this really is an Arabic text. And so you can see, well, first of all, it says Liebe Zik. I'll go to the next slide, actually. The incipit there begins this Zij in Arabic, astronomical tables, Al-Khwarizmi, by Al-Khwarizmi, the author, and you can even see here, this is the name of the titulus, this is the auctor, per Adelardum Batoniensem ex Arabico sumptus. He's just saying this definitely is from Arabic, and you can see these Arabic words, Al-Hijra, Al-Muharram, the first month, Al-Khwarizmi, of course, the author, and further down, in fact, you have Al-Majest, the great work of Ptolemy in its Arabic, with its Arabic title. Strangely enough, he also puts numerals in rubric. So for him, numbers and Arabic words are what he really wants to bring out. Now, the greatest of the translators of the 12th century was Gerard of Cremona. I often consider him as the equivalent in 12th century Spain to Hunayn ibn Ishaq in 9th century Baghdad, because he was very prolific. He translated over 70 works from Arabic into Latin, but we know that he was also, or maybe his job was a canon of the Cathedral of Toledo. We're now dealing with what became the main centre for translation, thanks to him and his colleagues in Toledo. But we can see here the context of translation is very much within the cathedral. At this time, it's not so much sponsored by the kings or by noblemen, but it is sponsored by the church. And we know that he was a canon here because, again, if I go to the next one, we have a reference here to G, Ego G. This is another charter from 1174, in fact. G, Dictus Magister Confirmo. So he's signing his name as G, and we can infer for other reasons that this is, in fact, Gerardus, called the master, confirms what has been said above. But we also have on the same page one of his most famous colleagues, and Dominicus Gundisalinus, who was the archdeacon of Quellar. And here we have Ego D, which must be the Dominicus of Dominicus Gundisalinus, and he is Collarensis or Collar Archidiaconus Confirmo. And we have a Johannes. We know John of Seville was also working in Toledo at the time, probably very closely, in fact, with Gerard of Cremona. And he here is the Magister Scholarum Ecclesiae Toledanae. He's the master of the scholars or the students of the Toledan Cathedral. And this may be John of Seville. It's not quite clear because John, of course, is a very common name. But just to imagine that the cathedral itself was a locus, or maybe the locus in Toledo for making translations. Just to emphasize that Gerard established the literal translation as the translation, the only correct translation. As a professional translator, one might say, it was very necessary. Well, several things were necessary. One thing was that you didn't actually add your own name to your translations because you were not important. I mean, it was the original author who was important. So his disciples, after his death, drew up a list of all his translations and said, we have to make it quite clear that Gerard translated these works because he didn't put his own name to the translations. That sounded a little bit like the Syriac translations we've just been talking about. But this is just to show that it is a very literal translation, because if you put his Latin next to the Arabic, this is a translation of an astronomical work by Al-Furqan. You have equivalents. So fa'in et sorry? Printed text. There is a printed text of this is a printed text, yes, because Goliath, the great 17th century Dutch Arabist, made an edition of it. So this is Goliath's edition from the 17th century. Well, I don't need to go. Kadamna, we have Premisimus, Ma, Cuius, Kana, Fuit, Yajib, Necessarium, and so on. And we can see not only is there a word-to-word equivalent, what one might say verbum de verbo, but also the words are in exactly the same order in the Latin as in the Arabic, which is not the right order for Latin, because anybody who's learned classical Latin, for example, will appreciate that verbs usually go to the ends of the phrases. Here we have them at the beginning, primesimus, for example. Now, another little vignette which helps to distinguish indeed what was going on in northeast Spain, the former Taif of the Ibn Hud, from what was going on in Toledo, slightly later, but located in the Cathedral of Toledo. And this is the forms of the Arabic numerals. I suppose if you talk to the people these days about the influence of Arabic, and they say, well, what do you mean by the influence of Arabic? I mean, what influence did they have on our present-day culture? They say, well, what about the Arabic numerals? You know, we all use Arabic numerals. It's a universal now. And the Arabic numerals, originally, of course, the Indian Sanskrit numerals taken in by the Arabs, especially by Al-Khwarizmi, the great mathematician and astronomer that I've already referred to, they were introduced into Europe, well, first of all, on the beads of an abacus, one might say, in the 10th century, but especially in the 12th century. But what is interesting is that they came into Europe in two different forms. And here we see an Arabic text written in North Africa by someone called Ibn al-Yasamin, in which he distinguishes between the two forms. This is the Western form, which are called the Gurab, the dust numbers. Here we are, the Ashkar al-Gurab. And Gubar. Wahiya Hadi, so he gives the Western forms, and then he gives another form, which in fact is should be called the Eastern forms, because these were in fact developed in what you might call the Central Arabic realm, Islamic realm, and you can recognize them as being the ancestors of the forms of the numerals which are still used in Arabic. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I mean, the one or two slight variations, but you can recognize the 8 and the 9 and the 6 as being the Western forms which gave rise eventually to the forms used in Europe from the 12th century onwards. But we find both forms in Spain in Latin works, Latin translations from Arabic in the 12th century, and the use of one or other of the forms helps us to say, well, this work must have been written in the valley of the Ebro. It must be something to do with, the introduction. Well, it's a bit complicated because, for example, it's the introduction of Arabic astronomical tables via Pisa into northeast Spain. In the works of Ibn Ezra, for example, we find them. The Hebrew sage, the great Hebrew author who was living in that area, so this is one way of distinguishing between works which arise from cultural context in northeast Spain and those which arise in Toledo. Of course, the Toledan works became better known, and so these Western forms became the more usual forms. Now, you see an example of the Eastern forms. Here we go back to the northeast, which I mentioned at the beginning, where we have what look, to our eyes rather strange, a work by Hugo Sancteliensis translating an Arabic text on different astronomical tables by someone called Ibn al-Mutanna. And we have, for example, this is well, one difference is that we're reading from the left to the right, whereas Arabic numerals are usually read, or the Western forms are from right to left. And so you have 150, which looks like 180 there. You have 60 here, you have 40 here. But I won't dwell too much on that. Just to say that Hugo Sancteliensis, his works are very much an example of works which arise from the court of the Banu Hud, who fled after the conquest of Saragossa by the Almoravids to a fortress called Huey de Calon, and we know that Hugo visited their library and took Arabic manuscripts from their library and translated them. And just to emphasize that geometry, the translation of Euclid's Elements by Adelard of Bath, which exists in 3 different forms, became, this became the staple text of Western geometry. And here's just another little picture illustration, this time of lady geometry here, showing different shapes, and the teacher here with all his students looking very eagerly at the products of geometry. But to go back to Hugo, because Hugo in fact is one of my favorite people of the 12th century, he was particularly interested in works attributed to Hermes Trismegistus and what he called Hermes' pupil, Apollonius of Tyana, both of course originally writing in Hebrew, or well, they're both mythical figures. No, Apollonius is probably not a mythical figure, not entirely. But they were writing what we would call Hermetic philosophy. But when Hugo translates a work called The Secrets of Nature, Sira Khalika, into Latin, the only manuscript we have, in fact, or except for a later copy of the same manuscript, starts off with an indication of the division of sciences. Here we have sapienti at the top, and you have the division to the mathematical and the sciences of word. And you have further divisions down here. But it's significant that we should have a division of sciences here, because what is always in the back of the minds of these translators is, how do we complete the picture of sciences? I mean, what is missing in Latin which has to be filled from the Arabs? In this case, he thinks that we ought to add Hermetic philosophy. If you go a little bit further here, one reason for adding Hermetic philosophy is that this work by Apollonius, you see his name there, Magus, is described as Magus, or as the people say, a philosopher, he is depicted as having travelled all over the known world. He's gone as far as India, opulentissima Indiae regna, the very rich kingdoms of India, the extremes. He visits the 4 rivers running out of paradise and so on. And there's this feeling, you've got the Babylonians here too, and the Assyrians, Parthians, but there's this feeling that this knowledge, the knowledge that one is able to obtain from the Arabs, is also, or some of it, is very ancient knowledge, which goes beyond all religions and goes really back to the sources of human thought. No matter how far away they are taken. From how far away they're taken. And I will just very briefly, I realize that I had my phone on just to keep an eye on the time, but maybe I shall, a couple of minutes. Spain was the main area in which Arabic works were translated into Latin, but just briefly, there are 2 more areas. There is the Holy Land itself. Adelard himself visited the Holy Land, the Crusader states, let's say, soon after the First Crusade, and was obviously based in Antioch for a bit. But Sicily was the third, one might say, the third locus of translations. And here's a very nice example of a psalter drawn up or commissioned by Roger II, the Norman king of Sicily, until 1153-4, and he prided himself of being the king of three cultures: Arabic, Greek, and Latin Norman, one might say. And for this reason, he commissioned this Bible with the Latin translation, well, the Latin Vulgate version of the Psalter in the middle, but the Arabic on the right-hand side, as it befits the Arabic, because you're reading from right to left, and the Greek on the left-hand side. You can already see the Arabic or Hindu-Arabic numerals being used for the Arabic here, the Roman numerals being used for the Latin, and the Greek alpha numerical numerals being used for the Greek at this side. Now, this is one example of something which is going on, perhaps in Antioch at the same time, and that is we have Arabic manuscripts with somebody, I don't know whether this is an Arab speaker or Christian speaker, giving in the margins the equivalent in Latin. This is, as you can see, the Categorias. This is the first of the first of Aristotle's logical works in the Logica Vetus, translated by Boethius in the early 6th century. We've got the Latin equivalent to Praedicamenta, the Categorias, which of course is a transliteration of the Greek, the categories, as the Praedicamenta there. I think we've got the Praedicamenta here. And then we have one of the first pair of definitions of equivocal and univocal, and you will see that it's well, it agrees with what we have in the Arabic. I don't want, yes, you have for equivocal al-muttafaka, there we are, and we have for univocal al-mutawatia, which is down here, mutawatia. Now, I think I better not go on. Well, sorry, just one more. One more area, of course, in which there was intercultural interaction was in the area of music, music being one of the quadrivial arts, and well, therefore part of mathematics. So it's, this is how it appears in Al-Farabi's Division of Sciences, for example. But we have live musicians, and here we have an example of Alfonso X, El Sabio, who was the initiator of another very important translation project, which was translating Arabic texts, especially on astronomy, astrology and magic, into Castilian. It's when Castilian or Spanish which might well have been used as an intermediary language in earlier periods, came of its own, as it were. It developed, it matured, and became a scientific language of its own. But here we see him with musicians, well, singers probably here. Oh no, sorry, these are his lawyers, I should think, because we have a charter here or a book here. But at the edges we have musicians, and of course they are playing Arabic musical instruments. You have on the one side the rebek, the rabab. On the other side you have the oud, the lute or the oud. And I think, well, maybe I shall end with this. The importance, it's difficult to overstress the importance of these Arabic works which are translated into Latin. One of these was Ptolemy's Almagest, and we have here the example of a 14th century manuscript, in fact, of the Almagest, translated, as with many other works, by Gerard of Cremona. Gerard of Cremona, we know now, added his own commentary or notes to the translation. We can see here is the beginning of the Latin translation, bonum, divine, etc. And then, well, ecce ubi primum capituli premedictiones in litium dated. So this is the beginning of the first chapter of the first book. You have probably Gerard's own commentary in the margin here in the same script as the text here. But then you have so many other commentaries, because this work was used by students in universities, and great effort was made to understand what Ptolemy was saying. And you have here a translation which includes references to a commentary by Ali ibn Ridwan, in fact, who commented both on this and Ptolemy's and Tetrabiblos, his great astrological text, and more commentary here, and all these alternate translations or synonyms for each of the Latin words written on top of these words. And I think I could go on to what was happening in the Renaissance in the 15th and early 16th century, when Jews came into the situation in a very big way, because translations made in the early 13th and 14th century of Arabic works into Hebrew were made, especially of Averroes' great commentaries on Aristotle. And then when in the Renaissance people were unhappy about the medieval translations, which are often translated into a very barbarous kind of Latin, the very literal Latin which I've shown to you just now, and they wanted better translations, and they turned to these Hebrew translations. And so people like Jacob Mantino retranslated many works, including Avicenna's or parts of Avicenna's Canon of Medicine, into Latin, and these became published. But I probably will just leave it here with these images of different stages, different contexts of translations, and I'm sure for the rest of the day you'll be finding out much more about the details and the processes and the reasons and the results of the Arabic Latin translations of the Middle Ages and Renaissance. Okay.
Thank you very much, Charles. It's a fantastic and fascinating subject, which I'm sure would require a whole day, not half an hour. So can you please sit down. We have, if you can get Peter here, we only have, I'm afraid, 5 minutes I've been given. I've received this note, and as you know, we're sort of running we're running late. And sorry, you want to ask a question? You just hold on. We have only 5 minutes, and then we will go for a break. There will be a microphone going around, so we'd like to pick up questions now. Yes, sir. Can you announce your name?
Yeah, my name is Dawood Azami. I have a suggestion. The focus of the talks today was mostly about the first phase of translation, mostly focusing on Greek and Latin. But there was no mention of Sanskrit, the Indian texts that were translated into Arabic in the first phase of translation. For example, the Burmese invited a lot of scholars from what is now Balkh in northern India to Baghdad.
I'm sorry, but this is a subject for the whole day. And
so there's the suggestion
not for the. I just want to concentrate on the two speakers,
for,
please, if you don't mind.
For part 2 of this symposium, there can be
sure.
a session or more sessions on Indian text translated into Arabic in the first
That's
phase.
That's for the organizers.
Second.
Yeah. That's a good point. But if you have anything for Professor, Professor Ahmed Hassan, can you just one way? Yes, thank you.
We thank the speakers for the wonderful presentations, and I just want to see more details on translation from Greek to Arabic through Syriac. The wisdom, common wisdom, which student of history of science learns about the translation movement from Greek to Arabic through Syriac, was that Syriac being Semitic language, it facilitated the translation from Greek to Arabic, which is again Semitic. So in between Greek and Arabic, there is a mediator, which is this is true? And if it is true, was it the outcome of the translation movement without having Syriac in between would have been the same?
That's an excellent question. Well, I think this is for both. Any of you?
So, I mean, obviously Syriac is a Semitic language, there's no doubt about it, and therefore has greater affinity to Arabic than to Greek. But the Syriac which we have here is a very Hellenized Syriac. So like certain particles like Greek gar, for instance, become Syriac ger and are constantly used, and often we find something that we've seen with Jared of Cremona, who dies in 1187, this literal translation that Charles illustrated by putting the Golius edition and then in his handwriting the Latin translation. We find something very similar with the Syriac. So I think this point that you had to translate from Greek into Syriac first in order to overcome like this bridge between Indo-European and Semitic languages, I think is overstated, and I think it's not so important. And I say this because if you look at Hunayn's translation, for instance, which are far more sophisticated, you can see that where we have the Syriac, that he often goes back to the Greek and mirrors the Greek much more closely than the Syriac intermediary, whilst adhering to Arabic syntax. I mean, I could make points about conditional clauses. I don't want to go into details, but so I think that point is overstated.
Well, one could say the same, actually, about the second stage of translations when Arabic works were translated to Hebrew, and Hebrew, of course, is very close to Arabic. And Jewish scholars who were educated in an Arabic context were writing, of course, Judeo-Arabic. They were writing Hebrew, Arabic with Hebrew script. And the Latin translators, when they wanted a new translation of Avicenna or Averroes in the Renaissance, they justified going to the Hebrew text because they thought that the Hebrew was a very literal, if not a calque, of the original Arabic. So the same sort of question could be asked. We have Hebrew intermediaries already in the 12th century, like Abraham Bachia, and Shlomo, yes, Hamiatis, and so on. And
disappointed that you didn't mention that.
I'm sorry. So yes, so. Well, one question to me is, did you deliberately leave out the Bait al-Hikmah?
Yes, of course. But I mean, that's a different thing.
Thank you. I have been given signals by the organizer that I really must stop here so that we can gain time, and maybe perhaps you can have a chat directly with the speakers over the break, unless there's something urging which is very important that has to be said for everybody. Otherwise, I'd like to thank you for your patience. We've had a very excellent morning so far, and I wish all the other sessions would be as good as it is. Thank you so much.